It's end of June, and Jen and I have successfully burned out this area for something to be planted. Now I'm going to talk about why I feel this is the worst spot for a food plot, which leads me to what we are going to plant here to end with. But I want to talk about 5 locations that you need to avoid when it comes to planting a food plot, and this one has all 5, believe it or not. So it really, and I still look at it, even Dylan, even coming down here to make this video, I'm like, sure we can't plant something here, food plot, or use it some way. We could put a blind here, and Dylan was a pretty resounding no.
No.
So Dylan has to keep me on the straight and narrow sometimes. And this is one of them. And really, one of the things I want you to look at these 5 locations and understand why they make bad food plot locations. This area right here, it's in the middle of some of our most secure cover. In fact, when we drove in here, I found a shed right down there. Why is there a shed here? We didn't find any sheds in our yard. They're here because we find lots of bedding in this area. It's very secure. We don't walk in here. We found berry sheds right over here about 80 yards from here. So not very far, and he's our #1 target buck. If we can find him next year for hunting season, he's gonna be a monster, a 6-year-old. He was already probably pushing 170 last year, and who knows what he'll be this year. That they have a tendency to blow up, which 170, if it wasn't blown up enough already, he's gonna be a giant. But bottom line is, this is right in the middle of the cover. What does that do when it's good buck bedding cover? You know, we have big food up there. We have big food about a 1/4 mile away over there. We have pretty solid food, a little over 1.25 acres, about 500 yards that way, and that gives us this depth right back here that we talk about often, where a buck might bed. We stick food back here, in this case 3/4 acre or 1/2 acre, whatever this is, 2/3 acre, then we displace buck bedding. The reason bucks are bedding back here is because it's not on a major food source. We have does up by that food source, that one over there, that one over there. That means when we get down to this location right here, this is mostly buck bedding all the time. We put a food source down here. Now we just destroyed buck bedding. It doesn't matter if it's high or low, what direction it is. If we had major food all down the bottom here, bucks would be right up there. We put a food source up there. Where do they go? You know, there's not going to be a lot of room once we put food down here. Now we put a bunch of does and fawns here, other young bucks, deer that can tolerate a lot higher stress level because food is stress. Now you can actually pinch those bucks out because you put a food plot back in bedding cover. That's why it's really critical that if you're going to put a hunting plot, we have a hunting plot off to the side, which is near this yard. You can see our neighbor's house down there. We walk right along their yard. We go into a hunting plot that's right down the bottom here, blow our scent back at the yard. It's just a pass through. It's about a 1/4 acre hunting plot. It's not displacing deer. Bucks won't bed right next to it, but they didn't already. So that's not a bad thing. They'll still bed here 150 yards away, 100 yards away, even though we have that 1/4 acre food plot. It's just a pass through. That's 2.5 acres up there, 2 3/4 acre. That's 1.25 acres over there. We have a combined 1 3/4 that way. We have 4.5 over there. So we get down here, put a 1/4 acre, doesn't even compare to those other areas. If the food plot is big enough, you start putting doe bedding next to it because it's so big and they want to consistently use it, and it's either on their way or right next to big food sources like all those other food plots, then that's where it starts to displace buck bedding. In this case, we can have it just as a pass-through mostly for bucks. In fact, we see more bucks down here than does quite often. So that's #1. If you're going to displace buck bedding, displace bedding in general, then you can't have it. #2, if you can't hunt it, don't put a food plot in the middle of your 40 acres if you have to hunt the outside thinking that deer are going to go to that food source every afternoon. That means when you come into the property, you're potentially coming in on bedding area because they're all focusing in the afternoon in the food source. You can't hunt it. So that means the last hour of daylight, if a buck's on your property on that food source, which is a good food plot, that's what it should be, that he's there during daylight often, you can't hunt him. So what's the use of having that food plot? Now we have food plots that we can't bow hunt. We have about 15, 16 food plots, and all but 3 or 4 are gun only. Meaning we can't bow hunt them because if we get on them, we're spooking deer. But if we sit off on 150 yards, 200 yards, 100 yards off to the side safely, we can watch deer come out to it every night and never spook them. So if you can't hunt it, and it's drawing deer away from your stand locations and you can't hunt those deer, really, really bad strategy. No different than having a water hole in the middle of your property that you can't hunt. That's a sin. You want to have a bow stand over a water hole, and if you can't, it's drawing deer away from your bow stands. Can't hunt it if it's back in an area like this that's going to displace buck bedding, both bad. But also if you have to pass through it. So if we have to pass through it to get to a stand location or an area where we want to hunt, very bad location, because then every time we walk by it, we're going to spook deer. Neighbor's house right there. That means if we access right behind the neighbor's house, which we can about 30 yards behind their property, we can come in from the bottom down there and we can go into stand locations over here. Really good stand locations for bedding area bucks in the morning. Because we're not putting food here, then if this is food right here and we access down there, we're going to spook deer here. And if we're spooking deer here, it affects 200 to 300 yards in every direction. So that's a really bad thing. So if we can't hunt it, if we have to access through it, if it's going to bump deer, be in the middle of deer, that's a really bad thing. Now at the same time, this is what I see in a lot of cabins. We have a major food source here and we have a cabin or a home right there. It doesn't matter if it's ours or the neighbor's in this case. Every time he mows the lawn, every time he comes out, every time, and he's a hunter. And he seems like a nice guy, we've met him. But every time he comes out in that backyard, no matter what he's doing, he's gonna spook deer off this food plot. At the very least, he gets to see them. And since we can't hunt back here, or it's really difficult, he gets to see more deer than we can on this plot. That's a bad thing. Backside of your cabin. I've been to a lot of properties where they have to go through their only food plot to get to the rest of their land. They spook deer every time they come in and out of it. And that's no different than whether it's your cabin or your neighbor's cabin. Very bad. So if it's right behind a cabin, behind a house, if you're gonna displace buck bedding, if you can't hunt it, if you have to access through it to get to good stands, really bad. And finally, if you're putting this food source here, and this is big enough that it holds deer, next to the neighbor's house, he has good cover down in the valley down there. What's that doing? We put deer here in the afternoon, evening that are living on his land all day long. That's a really bad thing. We have a lot of food sources next to ag land, but the deer don't live in ag land during the day. They live on our land. They go to what we call holding plots because we hold them till dark, and then they go out in the ag land after dark. But if we're putting a food plot on the edge of our border and because of that food plot, we're putting deer on our neighbor's land that they get to hunt, especially those great cold morning, toe-numbing mornings during the rut, they get to look at them all morning. That's a very bad thing. So we don't want to put deer on our neighbors because of this plot. We don't want to have to walk through it and spook deer ever. If we can't hunt it, why put it here? If it's displacing buck bedding, that's a really bad thing. So there's many reasons that you can come up with why a food plot is in a bad location. And you notice I didn't even talk about what type of what fertility level of the soil is. If it's facing west and gonna get burned out or not. If it's dry soil, if it's rocky soil, if it's wet soil. Because all those other factors of hunting strategy and property design strategy need to come first. I could really care less what the soil is here. If I can actually throw seed down, it's not all rock, it's not all water. If it's a good spot for a food source, because it isn't one of in those 5 locations, then I'm gonna plant a food plot here. I don't care what the soil is. I learned that years ago, late 90s, early 2000s in the UP of Michigan. I learned that I could change the parts per million of nutrients in a soil 100 times over with just in a couple of years by crop rotations, lots of buckwheat, lots of rye. That's how we incorporate a lot of our soil, like our soil builder. Some are soil builder, WHS Wildlife Blends, a seed company I now own. Because you can plant anywhere. You just have to pick the right seed for the right conditions, for the right time that the moisture comes, get rid of your weeds like we did here. So what are we planting here? We're planting switchgrass. And I want pure switchgrass here. Now pure switchgrass, if we have pure switchgrass here, they're not gonna bed on the neighbor's property down there, but they are going to bed more in this thick cover we have surrounding here because it's a thermal protection, it's screening protection, they can't see through it, they don't like to bed in it. So that means when we access down the bottom, at the bottom of the switchgrass, we're not spooking deer because they're hidden all around up here. That complements that hunting plot down there. We actually hold deer closer to the hunting plot in the form of mature bucks because we have the switchgrass here. So we're getting this ready for switchgrass, which is the opposite of food. Typically, if it's a bad spot for food, it's a great spot for switchgrass and cover like it is right here. Typically, if it's bad for food, it's great for bedding. If it's good for bedding, it's bad for food. I hope that makes sense. We don't want deer bedding in this. We use pure switchgrass. They'll bed around it. They're obviously, like I said, not bedding in the yard down there at the neighbors. So for all the reasons that this is a bad food plot location, and I hope any one of those reasons should be enough of a reason for you not to put a food plot in location. But for all those reasons, this is a bad spot It's a great spot for switchgrass. We'll bring that to you next year down here. Watch how this brown, terrible soil, never been planted location turns into a beautiful field of switchgrass like we've done just right up there, about 150 yards up high. Try to avoid, always remember that soil, it used to be, I even saw it on a TV show, like get a soil map, pick your best soil, plant a food plot. Oh, terrible advice. No, that's no different than saying, I like to hunt red cedars, so I'm gonna find the best red cedar on the land and put a stand location there. Terrible advice. Instead, make sure those 5 things aren't happening, do the opposite, and figure out what you have to do to the soil to plant the right food for that location. That's how you're on track to a great food plot program. That's what we help our clients do every year, whether it's Dylan, Joe, Kevin. Wes will be going to some clients this fall too. He's the one that manages our seed company, he's a farmer. But bottom line is, you can have a great food plot program if you make sure you don't do those 5 things this year. That'll help you have a great hunt, help you have the ability to build a great herd, be an actual herd influencer in the neighborhood, because most people do at least 1 or 2 out of 5 of those things, let alone 5 out of 5. We see that all the time. Don't be that person, and you'll have a great hunt and an ability to enjoy a great herd this fall, this winter, and beyond. Hey folks, I really appreciate you watching, and I want to invite you to check out our main website, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com. I'm going to miss all these, but we have seed to offer, hats, articles, web classes, books, consultations, and even a new podcast. I think we have 17 podcasts out there right now for you to listen to. So we have a lot to offer. Most of all, if you don't want to buy anything, I'm going to keep offering free videos, free articles. We have over 600 articles on the site. And most of all, thank you very much for watching, reading, listening, being a part of Whitetail Habitat Solutions. If you want to check this stuff out, awesome. Links are in the description.